Hi, my name is Lorena, and I'm a fourth year at UC Santa Barbara, and I want to talk about what Black and Brown solidarity means to me. I remember attending my first march during my first year of college. It was during the beginnings of the Black Lives Matter movement, and right after Michael Brown's murderer was acquitted. And I remember right before the march, I got my poster, and my friend was telling me, "Hey, if the cops give you 2 warnings, you dip." And I was like, what are we doing today? Like, what are we expecting? And then I should have known, considering what had been happening in Ferguson, that the cops were capable of anything. And so I remember beginning the march and seeing SWAT teams and cops with shields and dogs and fully loaded armor, and I was wondering what they were capable of during a peaceful protest, and that kind of furthered my anger towards the police state, and it made me realize that it was important for me to be present at that moment during that march, to show solidarity with the Black community and to show my anger and frustration against the police state that murdered Michael Brown. And that kind of began my my initial start in realizing that I need to do my part in whatever way I can to show my solidarity. And I do my best by, calling out the anti-Blackness that exists within my family and within my parents. And it may hurt seeing them be frustrated, but at the end of the day, I know that I'm calling out the racism that stems from white supremacy, and yes, it's prominent within our Latino families. And so that kind of made me realize that I needed to learn more about what it means to have Black liberation. And so I picked up the Black Studies minor, and I got to learn more about, Angela Davis, Malcolm X, Audre Lorde, James Baldwin, the white spatial imaginary, and all these other different issues, and learning about, liberation through all these different, Black scholars, and doing my best to listen to the Black community as well, to my Black peers, and understanding where my role it is in terms of providing platforms and just being present. Sometimes that's all it takes. And so for me, Black and Brown solidarity means at least for me, understanding the Black struggle, fighting for Black liberation, and then fighting for the liberation of all. Because I wholeheartedly believe that our liberation begins with the Black community first, and then we can start talking about the liberation of others. Thank you.
Black and Brown solidarity is important because both groups face similar forms of post-colonial oppression, and the only way to get through it is in numbers and solidarity. It's important for non-Black people of color to find and recognize Black identities within their culture, and for Black people to find non-Black identities in theirs.
Black and Brown solidarity is important because a lot of the time our disunity benefits the agenda of our oppressors and even feeds their power. By uniting behind one loud voice, we can fight a more effective fight against the discrimination of all people of color.
Hi, Carla. I'm going to answer the questions. First of all, why do you think it matters that we stand for Black lives? As someone who is a person of color, but who is not Black myself, I think it matters that we stand for Black lives because Black Americans and Black people in general have always been at the forefront of any movement for equality or any movement of justice in this country, mostly because there's a systematic devaluation of Black lives in this country and in the West in general. And because of this, because of the fact that they always have to face, no matter what position they are, no matter their sexuality, their gender, their income, their class, anything, no matter what, they're always going to be a Black individual. And there's always pressures, there's always injustices that stem from that. And so it only makes sense that they would be the ones leading the charge in all these fights for, first of all, LGBT rights, and Marsha P. Johnson, women's rights, income inequality, workers' rights, labor rights. It only and at each of these movements, there have been attempts to push them away, to ignore the contributions, for example, that Marsha P. Johnson made towards the LGBT movement. And it's important that we acknowledge that Black Americans, Black anybody, anyone who is Black, has made amazing contributions to any movement for equality, and also to return those contributions that they have made by supporting Black Lives Matter, who their only goal, first of all, is to make sure that people know that Black lives matter in this country, that they can't just be thrown away, they can't just be killed without repercussions, without feeling like they're trash. It only makes sense that we return, as a person of color myself, that we return that kindness, and that we acknowledge that Black individuals are people as well, and they are people with their own injustices they face every single day just because of their skin color. Okay, and what are you going to challenge? How are you going to challenge your own ingrained prejudices? I think challenging your own ingrained prejudices is an everyday process. I know that I grew up in a very diverse neighborhood, but even then, I would hear of racism from my own family members, who were grown up. They would always use slurs towards Black people, even within our own community. And we all know how big of an issue colorism is in the Latinx community, that anyone with darker skin is treated as pretty much below human compared to someone with whiter or just more lighter skin in general. And it's important that we challenge the prejudices that we have, such as associating darker skin with some weird, evil stereotypes for some reason, which is just idiotic. But, and second, I hope that was good. I'm rambling. My dogs. I had to escape my dogs. Because I'm in the garage. Because my dogs are barking. And let's see, I'm just looking at the Black Lives Matter website. And it's also really significant, I think, to acknowledge the fact that the Black Lives Matter movement is not just about police brutality towards Black people in general as well. It's such a far-reaching movement. Not, of course, police brutality is such an important issue that it's taking away so many people, so many Black men and women of this generation. The next Trayvons, next Tamir Rices, they could be gone because of how often the police just brutally seek out and they surveillance these neighborhoods like crazy, waiting for a crime. And any chance of a crime occurring, they jump on it without even waiting to see if there's actually a crime occurring. They police these children, these Tamirs, these Michael Browns, these these Trayvons, before they even have a chance to prove that they're not even criminals. But police brutality is obviously not the only issue. There's economic equality, there's the fight against war, there's the fight against the effects that climate change will have on these people, the effects, for example, that were in Flint, Michigan, where Black people were disproportionately targeted because of in the water supply. And it's about acknowledging the humanity of Black folk, of acknowledging the equal humanity of Black folk. And I think that's a very important movement that we all should strive behind. All people of color, all non-people of color, all people of all sexualities, all people of all genders, people of all any member of society should strive to make Black people feel welcome, make Black people feel welcome in their humanity, welcome and accepted in any community that they are in. And I don't know what else. If you have any more questions, let me know, and I can answer them real quick. Hope that was good. I hope that wasn't bad.
If the 2016 presidential race would have been decided by Black voters alone, it would have been a landslide victory for Hillary Clinton. Now, I don't know why that is exactly, but I do know how it made me feel. It made me feel like someone had my back, or someone had our back. You see, my first year here in the United States and my freshman year of college was marked by the presidential campaign, especially by Donald Trump's campaign. And it was the first time I realized that a large group of people um, responded to a rhetoric that actively um, dehumanized and actively spoke against a group I belong to. Donald Trump's rhetoric spoke against Mexicans, against Latinos, against Muslims, and seeing another group which wasn't actively um, attacked by Donald Trump respond to this, or I feel like responded to it, and go out and vote against this person, made me it made me realize that maybe the struggles of different peoples are not independent or discrete from each other. It made me realize, number one, that minority groups have a better chance of us of having agency, a better chance of asserting change when working together than when working alone. It made me realize that minority groups have a lot of common struggles around the world, and especially here in the United States. And it made me realize that these issues that different groups face are not independent but are interconnected. So I guess the reason black and brown solidarity is important to me, or the reason I believe it's important in general, is because black and brown issues are not independent of each other, and they're actually very closely connected. Um, Discrimination and oppression takes many forms, but it follows the same general pattern where groups of people in power try to use that power to perpetuate it and to put those without power um, down. So solidarity is a way of those without power of gaining power, of standing together and standing up against a history of oppression, a history of discrimination that has existed in this country against African Americans, against Latinos, against people of color in general. And the second reason why I believe important, one being that it helps us be stronger and assert change, is that, uh, as I said before, these issues are interconnected. So, for instance, there's anti-blackness in the Latino community, and that's an issue we have to deal with, and we should deal with, and we shouldn't just look at racism in white communities, but also in ourselves. Um, so it's a way for us um, to better understand each other's struggles and to eradicate uh, problems and eradicate all forms of oppression, of discrimination, wherever they may be. So I think that for me is why I think black and brown solidarity is important.
To engage Filipinos, queers, my communities, my identities, and my representatives, especially, to talk about being able to fully fund and support black and brown, queer, trans folks throughout their entire process, through giving them civil rights, through allowing them to be able to marry, and making sure that that liberty, that freedom, that right is not taken away. At the same time, advancing the cause in order to make sure that trans folks being discriminated across the entire country, and especially in North Carolina, where bathrooms are still, I believe, gendered, where we need to make sure that these people who, due to society not believing that their identities are valid or exist, need to have these spaces and these resources in order to make sure that they not only survive, but they thrive in all the settings that they're put in, whether that be in academia or in the military. On top of that, I want to make sure that the people around me are knowledgeable about free trade agreements, especially the Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership. These free trade agreements usually, if not all the time, end up with workers being exploited, and that, from being here in America, really reverberates back to the Philippines as well, with Black folks here and family, my fellow kababayans or fellow countrymen back in the Philippines having to leave the country in order to find work because they could not support themselves back in the Philippines. So we have to make sure that workers are supported, whether they are in the Philippines and whether they are here in the US, and making sure that these workers are receiving full pay, no wage discrimination, and have fair labor practices that is in their workplace. In the end, this is only the start. There's so much more we can do in order to make sure that this, I would say, oppression cannot persist in our country, in our system, in our everyday lives. We can no longer just see it pass by. We can no longer just stand or be bystanders to the atrocities taking place. We must have an active role to make sure that these atrocities stop, and that we put in place policies and procedures to make sure that none of this oppression of Black and brown folks continues to persist. We can no longer be bystanders in the oppression that brown and Black folks face, especially Black folks, Black trans folks, Black queer folks face on this continent, in this country. This country was not made for us, but we must do our best to make sure that it does suit our best interests.